What's up, everybody? It's your boy Reggie Casual. Now, before we break into season 3 of The Casual, I wanted to go ahead and give you the skinny on living in Japan, but the street culture way. You know, what should you expect, and what's the advice, and what's the real, what's the truth? What should you do? It's basically what the street culture version of this is. Truth and advice. So I'm going to give you 5 things that you need to consider, not 10, but 5 things that you need to consider, plus some advice to go along with that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get it. All right, so first things first, language. Obviously, this is one of the first things that people think about before landing in Japan in any capacity. 日本来る前に日本語を喋るのが必要ですか? Is it necessary to speak Japanese before you come? It certainly can't hurt, but real talk, the most efficient way to learn Japanese is to actually be in Japan, you know, where the majority of people use it. And I can already hear the naysayers out there. You shouldn't go to Japan if you can't respect the culture and learn their language. No. This is like the best place to learn it. I know plenty of people that came to Japan cold turkey, learned the language to like nichijou kaiwa or everyday conversation, and they were fine. You don't need to be a fluent Japanese speaker to enjoy Japan. But I will say it certainly opens up a lot more doors if you learn it to a proficient level, which is like Nikyu level, right? Which is like on the Japanese language proficiency test. Like Nikyu is opportunity level. My advice, before you come, it might be good to learn some of the basics, especially if you're a beginner. You know, konnichiwa, daijoubu desu, wakarimashita, sumimasen, arigatou gozaimasu, and of course the universal domo. Alright, simple stuff. And if you're more advanced, you already know what the deal is because learning the language does increase your job prospects because you're gonna need a job if you plan on living here. Now, most foreigners who decide to live in Japan often become teachers, ALTs or Eikaiwa instructors. And many of them leave after 1 or 2 year stints, having had enough of the pretty much unfulfilling positions and because they didn't learn the language enough to do something better. That's why you should learn the language. For most, a job in the teaching sector is just a way to get to Japan, which is great if you're okay with near complete boredom, or if you like teaching English. If that's what you like to do, then great, but I found most don't. There are many jobs, however, you can do in Japan that don't require Japanese skills, like English college counselors or ambassadors, software engineers, and even staff at certain stores and shops. My advice though, forego the job. If you're relatively young, like 27 or younger, hell, you could be older. Go to a language school for a year in Japan instead. That way you can learn the language with no distractions outside of the ones you make for yourself. If you get into a school with a relatively good track record, you'll be business level if you study hard, Nikyu level, in a year. Easy. I promise you, trust me. By the time you get out, you'll have far more options than just the English specific jobs. It's worth a year if you plan on doing this Japan thing for the long run. If not, get an easy gig like an ALT or just visit on your tourist visa for a few months. Just don't get swallowed into teaching if you don't want to be a teacher in your career. Just don't. It is not worth it and it's boring. That being said, if you do decide to stay longer, you should probably have a hustle. Japan can be a very lonely existence if you don't involve yourself in something. Sure, like there's temples, there's history, there's food, but that runs its course. And a hustle can provide you with excitement outside of the mundanity of your day job. Or better yet, it can become your job. And it can get you some great contacts and build your network. I should know. But if you don't believe me, there are countless foreigners out here that have their own businesses, work for talent agencies as models, are photographers and videographers, magazine editors and writers, radio personalities. Some even reach fame status, especially if they learn Japanese. So having a hustle can absolutely be a boon to you. Get into a hustle and navigate yourself in some circles. Nothing's worse than living in Japan without one. It can get old real quick. Plus, a hustle can be quite lucrative in the long run. All right, so we got the technical stuff down, but what about your expectations? What is the social life like? I always say, lower your expectations if you're not Asian. This is the realest talk. This is the true truth. A lot of people come to Japan, especially those who have studied the language, history, or pop culture, and think that the Japanese themselves are going to love them as much as they love Japan and its culture. Now, many people who come here with that impression, they become hip real quick that isn't the case. Japanese people just aren't gonna accept you because you studied about them. And for many, it can set off a cascade of feelings that bring on thoughts like, why don't Japanese people like me? Right? Don't let that happen to you. Listen, if you're not Japanese, you aren't going to ever be Japanese. And you're going to a country where nearly everyone is. And many of them have very little experience with foreigners who are not Asian. I really should say that. You're not Asian. Asian people, particularly of Chinese and Korean descent, are able to float in Japan a lot easier because of these similar feature set. That's just the real. They have their issues too once the cat is out of the bag, but I'll let them have the floor on that. There's a lot of issues there. But when you're not at all Japanese or Asian, people can be off-put by your presence, no matter what ethnicity you are. The general Japanese populace is definitely well-mannered, but you'll almost certainly come into a situation that makes you feel like a second-class citizen if you take notice of it all the time. Things might pop up like if you speak Japanese, a Japanese person might ask you, "Nande nihongo shiberu no ka?" Like, why do you speak Japanese? Like, why? Or like not sitting next to you on a packed train when there's obviously some seats available, what we like to call the gaijin bubble. And of course, the visible stares and the clear prejudice sometimes at restaurants, rental properties, and even at your job. It can be a nightmare if you take it to heart. So, my advice, don't take it to heart. Understand that in Japan, they are very much about their society, but also understand that you have an advantage if you speak English and Japanese, which is why I suggest learning it once you get here. Ignore the ignorance of a small group to enjoy the benefits of your skill set, because that is better than dealing with people. And if you find the perfect set of friends while living here, Japanese people can be amazing individuals to have in your corner. Just like anywhere else. Just like anywhere else. But even in those instances where you create meaningful relationships with Japanese people, issues can and often will come into full view. Relationships, that's what we all need to know, right? Relationships, whether platonic or romantic in Japan, will vary depending on how you approach people and of course, what you're looking for. Sounds familiar because that's pretty much everywhere. Now, from the angle of a hetero male, relationships can be hit or miss if you're expecting Japanese women to fawn over you like you're God's gift from the heavens. This is largely not the case. Don't expect that. Just like women from your home countries, they have preferences, likes, dislikes, personality quirks, and of course, particular interests. And for the most part, they dig Japanese dudes. But what I have found is that Japanese are highly engaged in their lifestyles. Coming from a street culture perspective, people who like, say, hip hop, live it. People who like clubs and nightlife, they live that. Motorcycle culture, they live it. Basketball, idol culture, games, anime, you get it. They live their interests. So it would behoove you to be into whatever their lifestyle is too, if you're looking for something serious. And if they aren't into anything particularly hardcore, they tend to be incredibly conservative or traditional. Let me be clear. Hooking up in Japan isn't necessarily hard. You just gotta look in the right places. And I fully expect people to ask me, where do I hook up in Japan? And I will not give that info because that is ridiculous. Maybe later on. Jesus, stop it. But getting into relationships with Japanese people can be tough because most foreigners who end up living in Japan, like I said from the onset, end up leaving Japan. So a lot of the time, Japanese will forgo getting into serious relationships with foreigners because the expectation is that it's always going to be temporary. So don't be surprised to hear the question, so how long will you be in Japan? Also, the language barrier in many serious relationships can and often will take its toll if you don't make an effort on both sides to understand each other. Because there's cultural differences too, and those will also pop up and create sometimes insurmountable rifts that leave both parties wondering, why am I putting myself through this? This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. All right, so my advice, if you decide to get into any type of relationship with a Japanese person, be sure you have similar interests and ways of life. The whole opposites attract in Japan can leave you with someone who's completely not your speed. They may look good, they may be great for looking at, but you can end up miserable. And again, Japanese tend to be very conservative once they enter into serious relationships. So be sure to choose wisely. You've been forewarned if you're looking for the serious thing. And that's my 5, but I'm sure the I've been to and lived in Japan peanut gallery has a lot more to add. Maybe they disagree with me, which is usually the case. Or maybe they agree, or maybe they have something to add. I don't know. Or maybe you guys have an opinion who haven't been to Japan yet, or maybe you just want another question answered. Anyway, do all of that in the comments and give a like to this video if you will. And don't forget to follow on Instagram for the latest in fashion out of Japan and your boy. That's popping up. I think this is the right way. This is the right way. If I did that right, I feel great about myself. But most importantly, keep it locked right here for all of your info on international street fashion and culture from Tokyo. It's your boy, and keep it casual. Yoroshiku onegai shimasu. And I'll see you guys in a minute. Deuce.